What would you do if thousands of people believed the world would end in a single night, and then absolutely nothing happened? That's not a movie plot or a fictional story. That was real life for nearly 100,000 Christians who woke up on the morning of October 23rd, 1844, confused, heartbroken, and asking the same question. How could we have been so sure and so wrong? This moment would later be remembered as the Great Disappointment. To understand how it happened, we need to step back into early 1800s America, a country on edge spiritually and socially. This was a time of revivals, camp meetings, and constant religious excitement. People gathered by the thousands in open fields to hear preachers speak about sin, salvation, and the soon return of Christ. Society was changing fast. New cities, new ideas, new movements, and many believed the world as they knew it couldn't last much longer. Americans were asking, how close are we to the end? Into this charged atmosphere stepped an unlikely figure, William Miller. Miller was a farmer, a War of 1812 veteran, and once a skeptic. But after a deep personal conversion, he became obsessed with one question. Could the Bible actually tell us when Christ would return? So he studied. Carefully, patiently, verse by verse, his focus landed on a single line in Daniel 8:14. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Miller believed these days symbolized years. It was a common method of prophecy interpretation at the time. When he did the math, tracing the prophecy back through history, his calculations pointed to the 1840s. Eventually, his followers narrowed it down even further to October 22nd, 1844. And when that night came, people were ready. Families gathered on hilltops, some dressed in white. Others sold their belongings, quit their jobs, and waited under the open sky. As midnight passed, nothing happened. The sky stayed dark. Then morning came. Still nothing. The emotional fallout was devastating. Some people abandoned faith entirely. Others were mocked by society. But a smaller group believed the prophecy hadn't failed. Only their understanding of it had. From that, reinterpretation would eventually emerge the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So here's the mystery. Was it all just a tragic miscalculation? Or did something happen that night? Something unseen, beyond human eyes? And maybe the real question is even closer to home. What would you do if you believed the end was absolutely certain, and then life simply went on? For the Millerites, that shock didn't come out of nowhere. Their confidence wasn't blind, emotional, or random. In their minds, this belief was built carefully, brick by brick on scripture, history, and logic. Which leads us to the next question. How did William Miller become that confident in the first place? The answer is simpler than you might expect. His entire conclusion rested on two key ideas. Ideas that, at the time, didn't sound extreme at all. In fact, to thousands of Christians in the early 1800s, they sounded reasonable, biblical, and even compelling. First was something called the year-day principle. It sounds technical, but the idea is simple. In Bible prophecy, one symbolic day equals one real year. Miller didn't just make this up. He pointed to verses like Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6, where God clearly uses days to represent years. So when Daniel mentioned 2,300 days, Miller read that as 2,300 years. The second idea was about the phrase, the cleansing of the sanctuary. Miller believed the sanctuary was the earth itself. And the cleansing? That meant fire. In his mind, this could only point to the second coming of Christ, when the world would be purified and history would finally end. But there was still one missing piece. When does the clock start? To find that, Miller connected Daniel 8 with another prophecy in Daniel 9, known as the 70 weeks. That passage gave a clear starting signal, a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. After studying ancient history, Miller landed on the decree issued by the Persian king Artaxerxes I in 457 BC. From there, the math seemed straightforward. Start at 457 BC, move forward 2,300 years, and you arrive at 1843. By 1818, Miller was convinced. Christ would return in about 25 years. Still, he didn't rush out to tell the world. For 5 long years, he double-checked everything. He searched for errors, he prayed, he hesitated. Miller was shy, deeply uncomfortable with public speaking, and honestly afraid of being wrong. But he also felt something else, a growing sense that God was pushing him to speak. In 1831, he made a deal with God. If someone invites me to preach, I will go. And almost immediately, within half an hour, a young man showed up at his door with an invitation to speak at a nearby church the next day. Miller went out to a grove of trees to pray. He walked in a farmer. He walked out a preacher. And that's when everything changed. What started as a local message in New England didn't stay small for long. The turning point was a man named Joshua V. Himes, a Boston pastor with a talent for organization and publicity. Himes saw that Miller's message was timely. He went all in. Newspapers and magazines like Signs of the Times and the Midnight Cry rolled off the presses by the millions. Pamphlets flooded towns and cities. Huge camp meetings were organized, some using the largest tents America had ever seen. Tens of thousands came to listen. Before long, Millerites were everywhere. As 1843 approached, Miller narrowed the prediction to a specific window, from March 21st, 1843, to March 20th, 1844. When that entire period passed without anything happening, the movement faced its first shock. People were confused, but not defeated. Soon they realized a technical issue. There is no year zero between BC and AD. Once that was corrected, the timeline pushed forward by about a year. Then came the moment that reignited everything. In August 1844, a preacher named Samuel S. Snow introduced a new insight. Using the Jewish Karaite calendar, he argued that the cleansing of the sanctuary should happen on the Day of Atonement. In 1844, that date fell on October the 22nd. This was a day. The message spread like wildfire. Believers called it the true midnight cry. The excitement was intense, and so was the preparation. Some farmers left their crops in the fields. Shopkeepers closed their businesses. Money, land, and plans for the future suddenly didn't matter anymore. Why would they? The kingdom of heaven was just weeks away. On October 22nd, 1844, the air itself felt heavy with expectation. Across the northeastern United States, as many as 100,000 believers gathered in homes, churches, open fields, and quiet hillsides. Some watched the sky in silence. Others sang hymns. A few even wore white clothing symbolizing readiness, though historians still debate how common that was. Hours passed. Noon came and went. Then sunset. Then night. As midnight approached, hope slowly turned into dread. Christ did not come. When the sun rose on October 23rd, the world looked exactly the same. But for the Millerites, nothing was the same inside. Their faith, their certainty, their joy, everything felt shattered. One leader, Hiram Edson, later described that morning in heartbreaking words. Our fondest hopes and expectations were blasted. We wept and wept till the day dawned. And the pain didn't end there. Neighbors mocked them, newspapers ridiculed them. Children shouted cruel jokes in the streets, asking if they had a ticket to go up. The prophecy had failed. The sky had stayed silent. And the great disappointment had fully arrived. When October 23rd, 1844 arrived, the damage was spiritual. For many people, the disappointment was simply too much to bear. They walked away from faith altogether, calling the whole movement a clever illusion, a story they wished they had never believed. Others quietly returned to their old churches, carrying embarrassment, grief, and a deep sense of loss. But not everyone gave up. A smaller group looked at each other and said, "There's no way all of this was meaningless." They couldn't believe that years of prayer, study, and personal transformation had been built on nothing. So instead of throwing everything away, they started asking a different question. What if the date was right, but the event was misunderstood? That question split the remaining believers into different paths. One group, led by Joshua Himes, concluded that Miller's calculations were mostly correct. The timing just needed adjustment. They would later form what became the Advent Christian Church. Another smaller group took a more symbolic route, claiming that Christ had returned, but in a spiritual or invisible way rather than a physical one. But the most influential idea didn't come from a pulpit or a debate. It came from a cornfield. On the morning after the Great Disappointment, Hiram Edson was walking through a field to comfort other devastated believers. Suddenly, he felt a powerful impression. It was the one that seemed to flip everything upside down. The mistake, he realized, was the assumption. The cleansing of the sanctuary, Edson believed, wasn't about the earth at all, it was about heaven. According to this new understanding, Christ hadn't come out of the heavenly sanctuary to the earth on October 22nd. Instead, he had moved within it, entering the most holy place to begin a final phase of judgment before his eventual return. In other words, something had happened, just not something visible. Edson shared this idea with O.R.L. Crozier and F.B. Hahn, and together they studied it deeply. Their conclusions were published in early 1845, laying the foundation for what became known as the Sanctuary Doctrine. This small group also embraced two other beliefs that would define them: worshiping on the seventh-day Sabbath, Saturday, and recognizing the prophetic influence of Ellen G. White, whose visions helped shape their theology and mission. Over time, this remnant group organized formally. In 1863, they became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Today, that church spans the globe with over 21 million members. It's a movement born directly out of failure, heartbreak, and reinterpretation. So what was 1844 really? To many, it stands as a warning. A reminder of how dangerous it can be to set dates for the end of the world. A case of sincere people led astray by confidence and calculations. But for others, 1844 was a turning point. Interestingly, that same year carried meaning far beyond the hills of New England. Halfway across the world in Persia, a young merchant known as the Bab declared his prophetic mission on May 23, 1844, an event that would eventually lead to the Baha'i faith. His followers also pointed to the same biblical prophecies, seeing 1844 not as destruction, but as the beginning of a new spiritual age. Coincidence or convergence? Whether you see 1844 as a tragic miscalculation or a hidden moment of divine movement, one thing is certain: that October night changed religious history forever. Out of disappointment came new faiths, new interpretations, and a hope that still endures. The belief that history is moving somewhere meaningful, and even now, nearly 2 centuries later, many are still watching the horizon, waiting for what the Bible calls the blessed hope. And now the question that still lingers after all these years: if you had lived in 1844, would you have walked away in disappointment or stayed to search for a deeper meaning? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story thoughtful or eye-opening, don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe for more.